Hello everybody out there, and welcome back to the only series on YouTube where somebody is dumb enough to laboriously, foolishly, obsessively play through every game they can get their hands on from the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation of shooters. It's been a little while since one of these, and I want to make it a more regular fixture on this channel, but first I have to do the obligatory YouTube thing and beg for money. But wait, please don't go yet. Don't go yet. Stick around for the video, I promise. I hope it'll be worth it. At the very least, don't let me have played HAZE in vain. Don't let my sacrifice be for nothing. Just wait a second, I just have one thing to say. Whether you're a new fan, old fan, you've been watching me since my jam days, or however you found me, if you enjoy my content, please consider giving a little bit to Ko-Fi or Patreon. I put a lot of work, time, effort, and love into the critiques, jokes, videos, documentaries, and everything I make for my YouTube channels, and I love and appreciate every patron so much, but bills are going up, unfortunately. My rent has gone up, and a lot of other life expenses, both medical, debt-related. It's a hard time to be alive right now, I think, and every bit of help helps. So if you enjoyed this, at the very minimum, please leave a like, a comment, a subscription, and with all that out of the way, let's get on to the video. Fear 2 often gets overshadowed by the first entry in the Fear franchise, and probably for good reason. Fear 1 is a nearly perfect blend of action and horror with memorable combat that hits a rhythm never quite mastered by its sequels. But on its own merits, Fear 2 is still a hell of a game. Much like Monolith's step from its sister series, Condemned to Condemned 2, it's a little bit weird, but I admire it for doing its own thing. Well, most of the time. See, Fear 2 picks up concurrently with the ending of Fear 1, where you're tasked with picking up Genevieve Aristide, an NPC character mentioned throughout the first game. As you go to extract her, hell breaks loose, and your character, the faceless Beckett, is captured and interned as an experiment. A lot of the fine details of Fear 2's story aren't very clear, like why there's multiple Armacam/military factions vying for control and fighting each other, but the characters are memorable enough, and the story moves at such a brisk pace you probably won't mind. If Fear took inspiration from the minimalist horror of Japan and its creepy girl in a haunted office building story, then Fear 2 takes influence from the over-the-top early 2000s of American horror, like Saw and the Texas Chainsaw remake. Fear 2 is brimming with gore and guts, which honestly gives the game more of a Halloween haunted house vibe. The other major development that helps it stand apart from its predecessor is the setting. Fear 2 is basically a post-apocalyptic FPS, moving from the blue and white tinged corridors of Fear's corporate setting to the more orange-hued debris of Fear 2 might seem like a big transition, but Project Origin has enough industrial facilities and sterile science labs to bridge the gap, feeling like a proper transition rather than a sharp change in scenery just for the sake of it. In fact, Fear 2's scenery might be the highlight of the experience. As you go through the broken city, you'll encounter all kinds of trippy paranormal phenomena, presented in higher and more visceral detail than in the first game. Seeing the ashen shadows of people caught in the explosion or exploring the ruins of an old subway help to dynamically expand the scope of the Fear world. But wait, why does this subway car look familiar, Monolith? The environmental storytelling is also ratcheted up quite a bit, most apparent in a mid-game section in an abandoned elementary school, where it slowly becomes evident that the faculty was experimenting on the children who went there, resulting in some bad juju in the place. It's a great few levels, and the elementary school setting lends itself well to pacing some real tension and horror in an otherwise action-packed thrill ride. The story of Fear 2 overall, though, is a mixed bag. It's sometimes haphazard, obviously telegraphed, and has some really wonky writing. It's noticeably more comedic and wears some influences like Metal Gear Solid on its sleeve. I'm looking at you, references to the Big Shell and the character named Snake Fist.
Now, let's get the hell out of here!
At the same time, it moves at a consistent pace, offering more popcorn blockbuster thrills than the relatively restrained storytelling of the first game. There's also the odd depiction of Alma. I give it a pass for obviously trying to be creepy and uncomfortable, but the sexualization of this abused specter borders on bad taste most of the time, to be honest. It's kinda gross. The gameplay, while familiar, has been slightly altered in some ways. It's better and more streamlined, with the Kung Fu melee attacks being remapped and easier to access than the first game. Fear's stable slow-mo powers have been preserved and are as satisfying as ever to use. Manipulating time to ambush groups of enemies or zero in on that perfect headshot, no complaints there. My main complaints are with the changes to the arsenal you use itself. You see, Fear 1 has a weird weapon balance, featuring some far-out weapons like a 3-shot rocket launcher and the ever-popular Perforator, which fires large spikes that can nail enemies to walls. The Perforator equivalent is here, but is sorely underused. There's only a 1-shot rocket launcher. But the most egregious change comes in the form of Fear 2's shotgun. The thing is, Fear 1 had a perfect shotgun. A once-in-a-game generation miracle of design that you never get bored of using the entire game. It's like the Doom shotgun in that way. Blowing limbs off enemies and literally turning entire soldiers into clouds of red mist was a seminal moment for many players who played the first Fear game. It's so fun to use, they could have called it a shot fun. However, Fear 2, for some reason, decided this was too much power, and they nerfed it. The result is a by-the-numbers shotgun, not a shot fun. It's just okay. Aside from that, grenades have also been changed for the worst. In the first Fear, grenades would explode on impact with an enemy, which was a solid way to clear enemy groups in slow-motion ambushes. Fear 2 doesn't do this. I watched helplessly as an enemy simply stared in bewilderment that I had thrown a grenade that bounced right off his head to the other end of the room. There's an expanded variety of grenades, like incendiary and shock grenades, but they aren't as useful as I'd like. The majority of the enemies in the game are the replica troops you encounter in the first game, and some generic military goons. Fear 2 still has some armored enemies, the invisible ninja weirdos who are just as satisfying to gib, and then some mechs to fight every once in a while. You even get inside mech suits sometimes for a little overpowered pwnage action, but these sections are brief and you never get to take the reins off too much, as the game is more than happy to keep you in check with a variety of rocket troopers and other mech suits to fight. And finally, I gotta say, graphically, Fear 2 still looks gorgeous, mostly thanks to some well-considered bloom, motion blur, and absolutely masterful use of lighting and color motifs. While not on the level of something like Dead Space, which I'll talk about later, Fear 2 punches above its weight in terms of fidelity for a 2008 game, utilizing some great art design to stand out. It's also notable that despite these artistic successes, it is prone to a lot of screen shaking and blur effects. Sign of the times, I guess. Anyway, Fear 2 is a weird game and a weird sequel for a weird franchise. On paper, it progresses the story and world. In execution, it has tonal differences that I don't always agree with, and changes to gameplay that sometimes have me scratching my head. But still, it's a fun, flashy roller coaster ride with the same satisfying core gameplay and a heaping of the edgy, gory violence we just don't get in the modern shooter gaming landscape. If you find yourself looking for a solid, breezy horror shooter, you can do a lot worse than Fear 2. HAZE might be the first game I've played for this series where the title isn't referencing the story, characters, or abilities, but the visual fidelity of the game itself. It's also the only PlayStation 3 game I think I've ever played that didn't have some kind of update. However, it's still a PlayStation 3 game, so... If you couldn't tell by the joke-to-game ratio so far, HAZE isn't a very good game. But it's almost kind of an interesting one. Kinda. Almost. HAZE is mostly notable for being the last in a long line of games marketed as Halo killers, partially because it came out around the time Call of Duty was ascendant, but also because Halo can't be killed, bitch! Also, HAZE is bold as hell for calling itself a Halo killer, then starting with a level that looks like someone put the first level of Halo 3 on the Nintendo Wii. In 2008, a year after Halo 3 came out. Fidelity aside, HAZE makes a grating first impression, but I think that's kind of the point. The entire conceit of the game is, fictionally speaking, an interesting one. In the dark, near future...
I was born in 2023.
Of 2023. Huh. That's weird. Anyway, in the near future of warfare, mercenary corporations rule the battlefield. This isn't necessarily a new idea for shooters, but what sets HAZE apart is Nectar, the battlefield drug that soldiers are on a constant supply of. From the offset, the game hammers home the idea that these soldiers are little more than crackhead frat boys with no regard for civilian safety, the lives of each other's, or really their mission. They live to get high on the nectar, which means they live for the thrill of killing on the battlefield. It's an interesting framing device, quantifying the thrill of playing a shooter and racking up bodies in the context of a drug trip, and then drawing direct parallels between that mental state and the psychology of immature, young, testosterone-ruled soldiers killing with reckless abandon. Taking into account the real-world political climate of the time HAZE came out, with the Iraq War in full swing, and there's some additional context to pick apart. This is extended by the South American theater you fight in, where you eventually discover that everything you've been fed is a lie, with the drugs given to you keeping you docile and obedient. It's on the nose, but for this era of gaming, as a metaphor for military propaganda, especially appealing to young, aggressive men, it's practically poetry. It smacks of some real Starship Trooper-style satire. If only the writing were up to the task of delivering on such an interesting premise. See, most of the opening chapters with your fellow Nectarhead simply have you following them around as Sergeant Lips here talks at you, occasionally pontificating about the nature of war in an eye-rolling fashion that leaves nothing up to interpretation. When growth hormone Pete Davidson isn't telling you the themes of the game, you're treated to, some humor?
Gag him and bag him.
Kidnap that fucked up asshole! I don't want his fucking coat on me!
Yeah, careful he doesn't get Stockholm Syndrome, Pesci.
You calling me a fag?
Don't call him a fag, sir!
Yeah!
Look, I'm not easily offended. Scenes like this certainly don't even register as a blip on my offensiveness radar. Here's a joke I've done on stage that's in the same range.
It's the same reason why a lot of men, even if they masturbate to transform, won't actually date a trans person. They won't date a trans girl. And I think that's because they're afraid of being called gay, which is funny to me, because if you're attracted to femininity, you're attracted to femininity. So like, what are you afraid of getting called gay for? Like, are you imagining that your friends will be like, oh, you like fat hips, big ass, you like long hair and soft skin and lots of makeup and big tits? Faggot?
Except, here's the thing, I can say that because unlike these corn pokes, I've actually sucked a dick. Anyway, it's moments like these peppered throughout that just undercut what I think HAZE is going for. It's so serious one moment, then tries to be an even edgier Gears of War the next. Its reliance on frat bro antics is so pervasive for the opening chapters that it just ends up being isolating. Maybe if it was less edgy at the time or whatever you want to say, but now it's just grating. It's annoying. This isn't just one joke either, the dialogue is constantly like this for the first few hours of the game. Just these dipshits talking about spreading freedom to natives and getting some. I get it, it's satirical. It's also just not done very well. And eventually, of course, you switch sides, and the obvious bad guys are the actual bad guys. It's a telegraphed twist that isn't done very well, and shocking, I know. I kind of wish it just stuck with the original satirical premise and wrote it to a more interesting conclusion. Feels like pulling a punch. Whatever. The story had a lot of promise, but between the juvenile writing and the bland characterizations, it gets lost in a haze. It doesn't help that the game itself feels blatantly unfinished in spots. More than a few cutscenes feature missing weapons in characters' hands, and the entire game is plagued by jittery animations in and out of cutscenes. And wait till I mention the environments. And all of this is before you even play the game. Maybe I'm bitching so much about the missed potential of the story because the gameplay itself is actually fine. Yeah, HAZE falls into the battleship camp of a game that obviously needed more time to cook, but had some dedicated gameplay designers that no doubt crunched 90-hour work weeks to get the game to at least feel okay. The control scheme takes some getting used to, with the O, B button used to switch weapon, the triangle used to change them, L2 used for Nectar, L1 for grenades, R2 used for melee. It's not too strange, and is just a casualty of the pre-modern warfare era of non-uniform controlling design. There's a little looseness to the controls and maybe too much head bob, but in the swing of combat, HAZE can feel pretty good, mostly thanks to some very punchy audio design. The guns themselves are run-of-the-mill, with a few semi-standouts like a flamethrower with an awful fire effect and a nice crunchy minigun, but by and large you're looking at a game where you always have an assault rifle in your hand throughout. It's an assault rifle or a shotgun, which gets pretty boring because that's about the same variety you'll face in the enemy department too. The real thrill of HAZE's combat comes from the aforementioned Nectar. When administered, you get a boost of damage, speed, and healing. The effects of Nectar are prolonged with every kill, meaning it's most advantageous to pop your murder drugs and then run out of cover like a psycho, killing everyone in your path. And in those moments, it actually feels great. You get what the team was going for. You turn into a battle-frenzied super soldier, popping target after helpless target, running headlong into battle. And then they just take away your nectar, the one selling point and saving grace of the gameplay for the rest of the game. But hey, you get the ability to steal an enemy's weapon. That's just as good, right? No. No, it's not. However, there is a slight silver lining, as joining the Rebel faction does give you access to a host of fun nectar-based weaponry. You get nectar knives, nectar grenades, and some traps. In addition to the weapon stealing, you can also play dead, which sounds like a really interesting idea that could lead to unique combat design, drawing enemies in, then surprising them. But in reality, you just lay down for a wee nap and get up and shoot more fools. Aside from these small gimmicks, you're just shooting people, and it's drastically less fun and interesting without nectar. There are some slightly interesting ideas HAZE plays with when you switch sides. Your entire HUD, previously representing health and nectar intake, are changed to represent you taking off your helmet. You don't have a health meter anymore, your objective indicator changes. It's an interesting artistic way to convey literally having your eyes open to the effect of the nectar, yada yada metaphor, subtext, satire. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of the good times cease to roll. Let's list off the hits now. You know them, you love them. Long load times, bad checkpointing, poor enemy AI. But HAZE adds its own special brew in the form of huge, vacuous environments. No, not like Halo, where you're occasionally treated to large open spaces that offer a variety of tactical considerations. This is HAZE, which means it's a huge open environment that is somehow still just a linear corridor to move from one end to the other of. These environments feel unfinished in some spots, sporting no shortage of bland, uniform texture design and a distinct lack of detail. Feels as though some of the game's levels had to be cut, retooled, or just designed on the fly with whatever assets they had available and not enough time to polish or hide it. Doesn't help that these standard environments are so bland and boring. You've got an assortment of tropical jungles, industrial factories, and urban ruins, but I'm shocked at how gray and boring everything looks. For some reason, it's always surprising to me how tedious and banal games from this generation can make even the most tropical paradise look, because of this weird need to make everything desaturated to hell. There's also the vehicle sections, which I believe is the real reason for the huge empty environments. HAZE features maybe one of the worst driving sequences I've ever seen in a game. As you drive along this road at the beginning, you're told repeatedly to hurry, as the mines will continue to break your car. So you've got to just get from checkpoint to checkpoint as fast as possible, hoping you trigger the next save before you blow up, die, and get to reload from said checkpoint. I know the designers knew this was a problem area because there's so many damn checkpoints and the status of your vehicle resets every time, making it easy to just restart over and over and cheese your way through. But it's still frustrating and had me throwing my hands up with annoyance at every one of the game's myriad long loading screens. Oh, and every driving section after that is just as boring, though mercifully not as torturous. Speaking of loading screens, you basically get one or two the entire game. Between that and the overly basic menu design, these are just a few more things that make HAZE feel like a rushed and unfinished, unpolished product. HAZE isn't the worst game I've played, not even close. And maybe I'm giving it some slack because deep down, I like its attempt at some kind of shooter satire in the early PS3 generation. But there are so many deep-seated issues with it that I can't call it a good game or even really worth checking out for genre enthusiasts. Just watch some cutscenes on the game on YouTube and you'll be able to see all it has to uniquely offer, because the rest of the package is just the same shooter staples you've seen before. Bland art design, lackluster visuals, average action, and forgettable gameplay. It just blurs into a HAZE? You may have noticed that of the now 30 games I've played for this series, Jesus Christ, I need a better hobby, there haven't been a lot of great ones. I've barely touched Halo, Gears, Call of Duty, BioShock, and plenty more. Well, now's the time to crack the surface, so to speak. With a Dead Space remake looming large on the horizon, let's take a look at EA's 2008 flagship horror game, Dead Space. One of the first true classics of the Xbox 360 era, Dead Space, like other games of the era like Gears of War, owes an unpayable debt to Resident Evil 4. Dead Space is even more of a spiritual successor than Gears, however, taking close encounter QuickTime events, inventory management, and a shop system straight from Leon's European Vacation and integrating it into a grungy sci-fi horror shell. But Dead Space is so much more than a new skin on old bones. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Dead Space starts like most good sci-fi horror. A company doesn't care about its workers. You play as Isaac Clarke, an engineer en route to the USG Ishimura, a mining vessel in distress. And then things go wrong. and they keep going wrong. You find yourself stranded on the Ishimura with an army of mutated alien corpses who want you dead. We've all been there, right? The framing and story of Dead Space is nothing really special, honestly. You have a handful of characters you interact with as the sparse story is doled out in walk and talk sequences and comlink chats. In between these moments are a constant stream of various objectives players are tasked with, usually having something to do with survival. Whether it's crashing into something, meteor showers, life support systems, or the alien monsters everywhere, Isaac just cannot catch a break. This is why we need unions. There is a larger story to Dead Space told primarily in audio logs and text logs found throughout. The cause of the necromorph outbreak and the religious and political conspiracy surrounding it is really interesting stuff, but it's never the focus. I'm divided on this approach. On one hand, it works with the player's situation. Isaac shouldn't care about anything but getting off the Ishimura. On the other, the world building can come across as thin and underdeveloped if you don't find those audio logs and text logs, despite having a pretty good concept and background lore built into the game. It's kind of ironic that EA wanted to use this game to launch a whole expanded universe when Dead Space is so restrained in the storytelling department. Maybe that's why all the spin-off media for the first game was so bad, but that's a story for another video. Stay tuned, coming soon. Isaac in this game is a personality-lacking facade for the player, and it's an incredibly odd choice given the legacy of the series afterwards. There's been a lot of hubbub about Dead Space not needing a remake, but the remake's choice to add more dialogue and characterization seems like a smart one if you're starting from the ground up. But the real allure of Dead Space isn't the story, it's the gameplay. I mentioned Isaac takes liberally from Resident Evil 4, and that's true, but he has more than enough tricks up his sleeve to make this spacewalk stand on its own. The main draw is dismemberment. Players are encouraged to dismember necromorphs first and foremost, creating tension during encounters as you try and preserve ammo and make every shot count. It's a great system, and the myriad enemy designs toy with the premise well, providing plenty of weird enemies with tentacles, growing limbs, and other body types that mix up the experience. It's a good thing too, because those initial baddies are a cakewalk once you get the Dead Space main combo down. Sweep the leg, then cut the shoulder. The other enemy designs are grotesque, creative, and plentiful. As you progress through your journey, Dead Space never stops trying to surprise the player with new enemy types and mixing those types throughout various environments and encounters. It's a great way to keep players on their feet, especially given the game's constant high-stakes objectives, which can get surprisingly mundane. So when the gameplay seems to be serving you just another button to press or signal to send you, you at least know the journey getting to that objective will be interesting enough to see through. Being an engineer, Isaac has a few other implements at his disposal for both combat and puzzle solving, primarily being telekinesis and stasis, which can both move objects and slow objects respectively. Stasis is most useful in combat, giving players much needed breathing room to heal, reload, or prioritize enemies in groups. And then there's the weapon variety. Forget about all the boring rifle, pistol, shotgun games we've looked at on here. Dead Space swings for the fences. Almost every game is some gnarly variety of space mining or engineering equipment that, when directed at a formerly human body, will mangle beyond recognition. Better set that days without a workplace accident counter to 0, because when Isaac's in town, nobody is safe. In fact, most of these weapons aren't safe. How is this OSHA approved? Your primary weapon is the iconic plasma cutter, a pistol equivalent that can be oriented horizontally or vertically to offer the most precise alien amputating possible. Each weapon has an alternate fire like the plasma cutting firing rotation, but unfortunately some of them are just useless. The plasma rifle, the most traditional weapon in the roster, is a satisfying machine gun, but has a nearly useless alt fire mode due to low damage and high ammo usage. However, buckle up because the rest of the weapon roster is worth the price of admission. You've got a sweet flamethrower that shoots fireballs, a telekinetic buzzsaw that you can just shove into crowds of enemies like a Black Friday sale on black market body parts. You got the line cutter, the plasma cutter's big dick cousin, and other implements like the force gun and the impact gun, which, I'll be honest, I've never really used much. One seems like one of those air guns your friend got for Christmas once, but you never really used because it was dumb. To top off Dead Space's cornucopia of gameplay goodness, there's an in-depth upgrade system that lets Isaac strut his engineering stuff to add stats to his weapons, health, stasis, and telekinesis. There's no level up system though, you've got to scavenge power nodes from the environment or credits to buy power nodes. If you know me, you know I love when games reward attentive players and choices, and Dead Space does this very well with power nodes, including having specific caches of ammo and goodies locked behind doors that you need to spend one to enter, so you're always caught between choosing your next upgrade or holding on to one more node in case you find a loot closet. Possibly the element of Dead Space that has aged the best, however, is the game's graphics and presentation. While there are concessions here and there, like scenes fading in and out, the minimalist HUD and claustrophobic presentation of the game remains impressive, especially for a game released in 2008. There are a few environments that can feel plain and a few textures lacking detail, but Dead Space's saving graphical grace is the immaculate lighting design. As you traverse Ishimura, the different decks utilize different color schemes and lighting to help vary the otherwise uniform industrial environments. Surprisingly, it's an approach that works rather well, focusing less on environmental variety through different settings than making each setting artistically distinct. The lighting throughout is just gorgeous, and while much of the game can be said to have the same muted grayish tones as plenty of other games from the era, the soft hues of orange, blue, green, and others are so masterfully implemented it sets the whole visual spectrum of Dead Space ahead of the pack. Now all of this sounds great, and it is, but Dead Space is not without its faults. And lacking any strong characterization for Isaac or any personal motivations, the story, as I've mentioned, is little more than a series of objectives leading from one to another. Yet not all objectives are created equal. In an effort to diversify the gameplay as much as possible, several objectives and sequences just aren't very fun, the zero-gravity sections, for example. Unlike later games, Dead Space doesn't allow free floating. You have to aim and jump from surface to surface. This can mean a lot of jumping and walking around big, vacuous environments, dealing with disorientation while being assaulted from all angles. Another example of Dead Space's variety that isn't up to snuff are the few turret sequences, where you basically sit in a stationary gun and shoot space garbage. It's not fun. It doesn't control particularly well, and more importantly, it just ends up feeling like padding, diverting attention from the fun, polished, and satisfying primary gameplay for what feels like a tacked-on diversion. These elements of Dead Space can feel woefully undercooked, but they're far from enough to even count as a blight on the overall experience. Dead Space is a bona fide classic for a reason. It's tense, innovative, engaging, gorgeous, and most importantly, fun. It's no small feat for a horror game to be as fun to play nearly all the way through while maintaining atmosphere and tension. It's a feat reserved for classics like Resident Evil 4. And though made in the shadow of it, Dead Space has absolutely proven itself enough to sit alongside such a legendary title. Here's hoping to 2 great remakes later this year that can build on the legacies of both. And there we have it, another episode in the books. What did you think of this one? I am already cooking up my next couple episodes. Let me know what kind of games you want to see. I think one of my next videos is going to have Transformers War for Cybertron in it. And then I have a Dead Space video coming soon where I explore all of the Dead Space expanded media. Please like and subscribe and follow because I don't want to have sat through both. Did you know there are 2 Dead Space animated movies? I watched both of them. Don't let my suffering be for nothing, please. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.